Welcome to the public and all members. Could you all please make sure that your mobile phones are switched off because it does interfere with our apparatus. Sorry?
Sorry, my computer won't let me go in.
Right, okay, I'll let you go now.
See if I get on with that.
Right, all phones switched off. We'll now have the introductions. I myself am County Councillor Ruth Edwards. I chair the Planning Committee, and my Vice Chair at present is indisposed, so he's not here today, so I'm ably attended on my right by
County Councillor Roger Harris, Opposition spokesperson.
Denzel Turberville, Solicitor.
Philip Thomas, Development Services Manager.
Mark Hand, Head of Placemaking, Housing, Highways and Flood.
Richard Williams, Democratic Services.
Craig O'Connor, Development Management Area Manager.
Andrew Jones, Development Management Area Manager.
Louise Corbett, Housing Strategy.
Kate Bingham, Development Management Officer.
Thank you all. Thank you all very much. I'm sure most people realise now that we do live streaming for Planning Committee. If there's anybody at the back who really can't hear what's being said, could you make me aware by raising your hand, please? Thank you. Is it all right at the moment? Right, thank you. Right, apologies for absence, please.
Yes, Chair. Apologies from Councillors Murphy, Davis, Evans, Feakins and Clark.
Declarations of interest, please. As of always, I prefer if there's any declarations of interest, please make us aware, if possible, even before the meeting, so that we know then that we will not run the unfortunate thing before of not being quorate, if we're aware of that. Councillor Howard, please.
Thanks, Chair. I should point out I am a member of Abergavenny Civic Society, although in terms of their representations on various applications, I have no input at all.
Right. Thank you for that, Councillor Howard.
Prepared and move, Madam Chairman.
Unless there is anything that needs to be raised, and I will otherwise sign those minutes at the end of the meeting. We have our first application now on page 19 to 30. This is application 01342, and I believe, Andrew, you will present that. Thank you.
Do we need to wait for Councillor Powell, Chair?
Oh, yes. Sorry about that. Yes, as she's the Abergavenny member as well. Oh, yes. Councillor Powell, that's okay.
I've left it there, they'll sort it.
Do you require a hard copy or anything now, Councillor Powell, to follow the meeting? Is there one available anywhere?
If there isn't here, she should be through in a minute.
Chair,
I know what we're talking about.
Right, okay.
I'll loan Councillor Powell my laptop.
Right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this is a full application for the conversion of a B1 office building to form 21 residential units. Some members will have visited the site yesterday, but it's a 3-storey building known as Newbridge House and is located at the junction of Tudor Street and Baker Street in the centre of the town of Abergavenny. Just to correct the officer report, the building is still occupied by the job centre on the ground floor, only with the upper second and third floors vacant. It's worth noting also that the application is presented to Planning Committee due to objections from at least 5 separate households, as well as an objection from a statutory consultee, the Council's Highways Department. As I stated, most of the members were on site yesterday, but just to run through the site photographs for the benefit of those that weren't. This is a view of the building. You can see there the existing vehicle access to the rear of the building and partially the car park. This is a view then showing that junction with Tudor Street and Baker Street. That's the side elevation of the building taken from Baker Street. And that's the sort of front of the building then, taken from Tudor Street. That is the existing car park area, and that's the spaces there would be retained for guest parking, or visitor parking. And that's a clearer view then of the existing car park area. Thanks. So as you'll see on screen, the site is shown, and to confirm it is located within the Abergavenny Conservation Area. The proposed layout would use the existing entrance we've seen on the photographs, as well as the parking area would also be retained at the rear of the building. So as stated, permission is sought for the conversion of the building to form 21 apartments. This would be made up of 15 two-beds and 6 single-bed flats. 21 parking spaces would be provided for residents with 4 visitor spaces. And as you can flick on, Phil, to the layout, that's the existing building. You also see there to the west, there's also a cycle store provided also. The building would be extended vertically via a mansard roof as well as towards Baker Street. The elevational treatment, as you'll see shortly, has been subject to significant amendments since original submission and now provides sort of a clear vertical emphasis, including sections of coloured render, hung slate and metal cladding, and additional soft landscaping, including trees and hedgerows, would also be provided. With regards then to the detailed considerations of the application, the site is within the town development for Abergavenny. It's not within either C1 or C2 flood zones. The site is not a protected employment site, however, is an existing B1 office use and therefore policy E1 applicable, and this will be covered later in the presentation. With regards to affordable housing, as members are aware, policy S4, the LDP, sets out in main towns that sites with a capacity of 5 or more should provide 35% of the total number of dwellings to be affordable. This would equate to approximately 7 units, rounded down from 7.35. However, given the type of accommodation and management issues associated with units within apartment blocks, the council's then affordable housing officer had requested a commuted sum of £112,092. However, this policy requirement is subject to appropriate viability assessment, and in this instance, the applicant provided a detailed appraisal, which was referred to the district valuer. This was also for consideration with a requested sum of £82,782 towards recreation. Based on 2 scenarios, being the full amount and an amount of 0, the district valuer has concluded that the proposed scheme would not achieve a competitive return that falls within acceptable profit range if Section 106 obligations were to be secured, and therefore on that basis, no financial contributions are sought. In terms of placemaking and heritage, as you'll see in the officer's report, the scheme has been subject to design negotiation with officers, including the heritage team. And the revised design echoes that of the developments recently commenced on the opposite side of the road at the former Magistrates Court site, giving clear, clean lines and vertical emphasis, as well as materials that are considered appropriate to the conservation area. And in that regard, it's not considered that it would fail to either preserve or enhance the conservation area. With regards to residential amenity, you'll have seen in third-party correspondence there are concerns with impact on neighbouring properties, particularly those to the rear. And whilst an additional storey would be provided, the building is at its nearest point 60 metres from the boundary with these properties and 40 metres from the nearest window. So officers are satisfied that in terms of residential amenity, there wouldn't be an unacceptable impact. In respect of highways, as I stated at the outset of the presentation, an objection has been received from colleagues in highways with regards to the number of parking spaces. And whilst the scheme does fall below that in our adopted parking standards, providing 1 space per bed only, given the town centre location, officers are satisfied that it is a very sustainably located site and that a reduced number is acceptable. The site's within, say, very short walking distance to the town and all its various amenities. Abergavenny is also served by bus and train services also. Returning then to the issue of employment, members will have seen in late correspondence very recent communication from the Department for Work and Pensions that have raised the issue of the Job Centre having recently signed a 10-year lease on the ground floor. This was signed in March 2018. This has an option for a 5-year review, but it would be a tenant-only option to break that agreement. In light of this very late information, the proposals compliance with policy E1 does require review, as this does show evidence of a viable business employment at the site. I'd also just like to raise, members will have seen this in late correspondence as well. The ward member for the area, Councillor Woodhouse, is unable to attend, but if I just briefly summarise the points made by Councillor Woodhouse, 4 points primarily. These are that she has no objection in principle to the change of use to residential. She raised concerns with the level of parking facilities, identifying that it would be good for more people to be able to walk and cycle and use public transport. Again, echoes concerns that the height of the building has remained the same throughout design amendments, and finally expresses a disappointment with regard to the lack of Section 106 contributions. Therefore, in light of that, notwithstanding the officer's report, in light of the late correspondence by the Department for Work and Pensions, and the impact of, therefore, and the consideration for compliance with policy E1, it's recommended to members that the application be deferred to review the officer recommendation.
Thank you for that very late update on that application. I will call, first of all, then, as it's been deferred, we better discuss some of it, as most of us were there yesterday. And then we will see if you agree with the deferral. Councillor Powell, I believe you're the only Abergavenny, and Councillor Harris as well, and Councillor Howard, the ones that I will call on mainly from Abergavenny. Thank you. Are you the nearest, Giles? Yes, I'll take Councillor Howard first, and then Councillor Powell, then Councillor Harris. Thank you, Councillor Howard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, it's not far from the land forest boundary and certainly within sight of my ward as well. I noticed Andrew didn't pick up on the comments from our Business Insights manager who raised concerns as well, similar to those within the DWP response. But that aside, and whilst I shan't mind the application being deferred, I find myself not supportive of it anyway. Firstly, the absence of parking and the objection from our highways section. I note what I'm told about it being a sustainable location. I'm not sure that I necessarily buy that, because it doesn't mean that we have no evidence to demonstrate that similar properties in the town, there are any reflections of the location of the development to levels of car ownership. And I do recall on the building that we gave consent for on the opposite side of the road, there's also a shortfall of parking there. And I know we shouldn't be necessarily guided by the motor car, but there's no point turning our back to it, because it isn't the elephant in the room. It's a real problem for town centre locations. And also that the height and design, I think the elevational treatment is appallingly blinkered really to its setting. I don't feel that, whilst it might look nice and shiny and new on the 3Ds that have been presented and that are helpful to see, I don't see that that's going to look any more appropriate than the existing building. Both will be an eyesore, either now or in the present. And I appreciate it's a matter of judgment, but mine is that fails to enhance or preserve the conservation area. Also, the mansard roof treatment and the additional height, that bears no relation to any other part of the town roofscape. And certainly nothing within the conservation area, so that again is quite inappropriate. And again, I must pick up on Andy relating it to the style and the design of the buildings and the construction on the other side of the road, but how about relating it to all of the Victorian properties that surround the area and the urban grain you've got there? Again, this is totally irrelevant, and if we approve this, I think it's almost as bad as decision as those who gave consent to the horrible building that's on the site now. So I won't support it, but if members want to defer it to talk about those other issues, fine.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chairman. I go with deferring it, but before I do that, the two things that come up to me. We're talking about the parking all the time. If you go through Abergavenny, there are many, many, many streets where there is no garages, no driveways, terraced houses where parking is really worse than it is here. So it's not causing a precinct. I mean, you can think of them: St Helens Road, Park Street, Princess Road, Victoria Street. They're all places like that where there isn't parking relevant to the properties. So people in Abergavenny are used to the fact that they can't necessarily have a parking place for more than one. To have one per flat is something anyway. And although the car parks do get very busy, the car park isn't very far away from there. So I'm not so concerned about the parking. I'm not really happy with that extra height. I think that extra height's making it too much like a big office building in a big city. I think if it was only the 3 stories high, I'd find it easier to accept. But I would go for deferral, because when we've got something like that where there's a tenancy that is due to go further, it's a bit more technical, and I think that needs looking into first. So I propose that it's deferred.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. Councillor Harris now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's a good point for us to discuss at the moment before we probably do defer, and it will let the developer know what our thoughts are. That's for certain, and I'm in total agreement with both the speakers so far. One could say almost anything replacing what's there at the moment would be better, but that's not good enough as far as I'm concerned. What I really can't understand is, taking a building like this and turning it into flats. And if you like, we all know the problems that there are in England with office blocks being turned into flats. And I'm not necessarily suggesting this is going to be the case. But I'd much rather see this building, if you like, well, not if you like, but actually flattened and rebuilt. If it's going to be built for that purpose, it will make a much better job for any of us looking at it, and certainly for the people that will be residing in it. But anyway, I go along with the deferment and hope that the developer will take note of what we're saying here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Anybody else wish to comment now? Because most of us that are here in committee today were there in the visit yesterday. So I would welcome your comments. Councillor Brown, please.
Yes, thank you. It may be the case that the parking requirements are possibly more in line with its use as a job centre as opposed to its use as residential accommodation. That's the only comment I'd make.
Thank you. And a conversion to something is very different to demolishing it and building something new. But as Councillor Harris alluded, I'm sure that the developer will take on board all our comments today anyway, but it seems as though we will, or I'll ask you now to take a vote on deferral. Could I have a show of hands, please, for deferral as it's been proposed?
I believe that's unanimous, Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. I believe that will come back again till the next committee meeting now in October. Right, thank you very much, Andrew. Now we go on to pages 32, I believe. And this is Landfoist. You're doing this one, Phil. This is 00346. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for the approval of reserved matters. That it includes the appearance, scale, layout and landscaping for the development of 106 residential dwellings, and that's pursuant to the outline planning permission 2016-00880, and it's at Grove Farm, Llanfoist. Just looking at the pictures, that's the entrance into Grove Farm from the B Road, looking up towards the site, and you can see, we couldn't see them so easily yesterday because of the trees were more clad with leaves yesterday, but you can see the Barrett's housing towards the top there on the ridge. And then that's a shot just further down the lane, looking towards the lower part of the site. And it's looking again further along the lane, not too far away where we stopped yesterday, looking across to where the housing will be built. over the left-hand side there is the site boundary with Gypsy Lane where the access would come. That's broadly, well, it's looking opposite from Gypsy Lane itself, the B Road into the site. Again, similar shot. And that shows where the public footpath goes, which isn't ideal in terms of the steps and orientation of it. And that shows it running along the back of the site there between the new housing development, running on towards where the school is. And that's the site boundary. So the site benefits from an outline consent for residential development for up to 115 dwellings. And this consent was granted prior to the ministerial decision to disapply paragraph 6.2 of TAN 1, which had attached considerable weight to the lack of a 5-year housing land supply as a material consideration in determining planning applications for new housing. The outline application was therefore determined on this basis rather than in accordance with the paper, and I quote, addressing our lack of 5-year land supply in Monmouthshire, the approach to unallocated sites, and its associated ground rules adopted by the Council in February of this year. The outline consent approved details of the access only, with all other matters being reserved. And therefore this application now seeks approval for the appearance, landscaping, layout and scale of the development. The outline consent benefited from a master plan which divided the proposed development into character areas, which are not intended to divide the development, but to provide a subtle change in style, appearance, layout and density as the development goes from the more suburban north to the more rural south of the site. The agreed character areas and parameters have been brought through to this reserve matters application, which now proposes 106 dwellings. There would be 37 affordable housing units, including 2 bungalows, which would be policy compliant, representing 35% of the total number of dwellings. Placemaking has been achieved through a character and green infrastructure framework that sees the site divided into 4 main character areas. And I'll start looking at the slides now. So those are the 4 different colours on the plan which show the character areas. So firstly, the northern section of the site is the highest part of the site. That's the area in blue. The houses are arranged in a linear pattern that follows the site contours with the smallest plot sizes here and a similar layout to the adjacent existing housing. This area includes mainly 2-storey dwellings, but also includes 2 affordable bungalows that have been added in response to a request from the Council's housing officer, who noted that there is a local need for single-storey properties. Secondly, the central area, which is just below that, includes the only vehicular access into the site off the B Road to the west, and it has larger plot sizes than the northern part of the site. And the area is characterised by the corridor of landscaping and tree planting along the main access routes. You can see that green route running west to east. All of the strategic planting will be outside private ownership and will be maintained instead by a private residents management association in accordance with the agreed green infrastructure management plan. And thirdly, the area to the south of the main access route, that's the area sort of in an orange shade. The area of the access route and planting corridor is proposed as medium density with a mix of plot sizes and will include the communal entrance flats and linked semi-detached and detached houses. The communal entrance flats building has been significantly amended since the application was first submitted to ensure that it did not have the appearance of a typical block of affordable apartments. And this has been achieved by breaking the building up visually with the use of different roof heights and materials together with additional doors and fenestration. We'll have a look at the house types after this. And lastly, the area that is closest to the Grade 2 listed farmhouse is in the southern part of the site, in that sort of creamy colour there, and if approved would form the southern boundary of Llanfoist. As such, it's proposed in character to be lower density with larger plot sizes, and this area will feature detached houses and cottages. And officers have negotiated that these dwellings will all have natural slate roofs, and the building line on the southern boundary has been pulled back from the edge of the application site to allow space for enhanced landscaping. The planting is intended to provide both visual screening from the south and an east-west ecological corridor. As you can see that line of green there along towards the south of the site. The road along this edge will be a shared surface rather than tarmac, again to soften the edge. And roofs would have natural slates to the southern boundary with fibre cement slates elsewhere, with the exact type to be agreed by condition. External walls would be rendered in a selection of colours to add variety, as well as types of red clay, and there'd also be types of red clay facing brick, again details to be agreed by condition. Windows and doors would be UPVC with coloured frames to be secured in agreement with the planning authority. So we just have a look further into these details. So that shows where the key sort of frontages are on the heights of the buildings, with predominantly 2-storey with some 2.5-storey dormers in the roofs. That shows where the affordable housing would be. The affordable housing would be edged in green. You can see that's up in the top northern part of the site there, so a little group there. There's the flats over to the western side there. That's right, thank you, Chair, with another unit alongside. And then there's, again, scattering here and down here as well. So there is a mix, a pepper potting throughout the site of the affordable housing. And then that shows the sort of connectivity and movement throughout the site, including movement through the open space to the eastern part of the site. And that shows some street scenes. It shows it's a traditional form. And some further street scenes there. And then we've got some visuals to illustrate how the site will look when the planting matures up. That's taken from the southern end of the site looking across. That's within the site. Again, showing sort of landmark buildings to create vistas. And then sort of well-mannered, traditionally designed houses. And a terrace. And then I'll run through the house types in a moment now. So overall, the detailed design of the development is considered to be appropriate to its setting and has taken into consideration Planning Policy Wales 10 in terms of the importance of green infrastructure and placemaking. It includes a variety of house sizes and ridge heights across the site. It also proposes clustering small groups of houses together to enhance legibility and orientating buildings and designing house types so that they provide active frontages at key locations such as street corners, nodal points and pedestrian routes. It also provides additional transitional landscaping areas on the western boundary and views into and within the streetscape using houses of appropriate scale to terminate key vistas along routes within the site. The proposed development is therefore considered to comply with PPW 10 and LDP policy DES 1. In respect of access, highways have no objection to the proposal. The parking arrangements indicated are considered acceptable and in accordance with the adopted parking standards for the authority and garaging standards. There will be adequate pedestrian connectivity through the site and to existing pedestrian facilities located on or close to the B Road. In addition, there will be a new footpath link to the primary school in the northern part of the site. And the proposal therefore accords with the design standards established in the Active Travel Wales Act. The applicant has confirmed that all public rights of ways, the connections to those are deliverable, including a new and extended public footpath in the southwest area of the site. As we can see from previous drawings, there is generous public open space proposed, and the play area would consist of 5 to 6 items of equipment for younger children. And it will take the form of a natural play area and be located adjacent to the east-west footpath link through the site. So it's concluded that that the proposal will preserve the setting of the listed farmstead at Grove Farm, owing to the landscape buffer between the development and the farm itself, together with the lower density, more rural character of development taking place on the site nearest the farmstead. The surface water system will be attenuated and will discharge into an open watercourse in the southern part of the site to be maintained by Dŵr Cymru Welsh Water. The proposal is considered to be well designed and creates a sense of place on the edge of the settlement close to heritage assets, which it will not harm. and the proposal will not harm existing residents' amenity and will deliver much needed affordable housing. So just running through the house types, you can see they're of a traditional form: chimneys, sills, headers, plinths. Some of the floor plans. I know a lot of you've seen these in the bundle already forwarded to you last week. So there'll be a variety of render and brick. That's a one-off sort of garage muse type building, which will be set back behind the group of buildings. I think you could see that in the one of the visuals earlier. And that looks slightly out of context. Obviously, it will be a part of a terrace, so it won't look like that in stark isolation. So that's the affordable housing, the apartments. So it's been broken up by treatment, render, and changes of roof ridge heights, and chimneys and dormers. And then those are the bungalows, the two bungalows, affordable bungalows. Yeah, that's a 3-bed affordable house. So again, it looks very much like the market housing. That's an affordable as well. Right, so if I just leave it with a couple of the visuals. So the proposal is therefore recommended for approval, subject to conditions listed in the report. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Phil. That a lot of detail in that application, and a lot of us were there yesterday at the site visit. I'm not sure whose ward this is. Is it yours, Giles? Right, Councillor Howard, would you like to... you know the site well, although you weren't with us yesterday, so I'll welcome your comments, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I do want to state on record my objection to the allocation of sites outside the LDP process. I'm not so foolish as to waste time arguing that, because I appreciate the outline consent has already been granted, so I'm not going to make any further reference to it. I've read through the report, looked at all the plans, including the amended ones, and the first thing I'd do is thank Kate for her input in making the scheme so much better than it would have otherwise been. And also to Phil, because my other question was to outline some of the changes that have been made as a result of the various amendments, but I think they're reasonably clear. The one thing I'm not so clear about is the status of some of the pedestrian links that are included on the plans, and particularly on the northwestern boundary of the site. And there's a photograph in the presentation of that footpath. It's got the railings to the left and existing hedgerow to the right. That's not, as far as I'm aware, a well-trodden path. I've seen one person use it, go so far and walk back again. I'd like to know how that can be maintained and upgraded within the scope of the consent, because that plan there shows a dotted line outside of the red line area. The site location plan shows it just inside. But if it is to be a viable and usable path, parents aren't going to send their children to school or anywhere else, or anybody else going to use it if it's overgrown, going to get brushed with nettles or damp vegetation. So that's the first one. And these are pretty random points. The house designs as a whole, they are pretty standard, but for modern development, they have a reasonable quality. The exception to that, I think, is the coach house. The siting of that in the middle of the sort of back garden, courtyard parking area is dreadful, and I'd hate to live there even if I was desperate. And I wonder if there's an opportunity to revise that. I would, and this is something I've raised with Highways separately, and indeed Mark, who provided with me a copy of the Section 106 agreement in the past. Obviously, the decision for the outline consent was granted before I became the ward member for Landfoist, so I had no input on that. But I am concerned about the use of that road, and I haven't picked up on any mitigation to vehicle speeds or quantity of Gypsy Lane, which translates into a lot of cars going very fast by the time they get to Llanellan. In the mornings, the road up to the roundabout, both from Gavarlan direction and from Gypsy Lane, there are queues there. There are then queues at the next roundabout by the heads of the valleys, and then towards town by Waitrose. So my point being is that a lot of people are already using Gypsy Lane as the route to the south, rather than going towards Waitrose and joining the A465 and then going to Hardwick. traffic speeds in Llanellan are particularly great, where there's a wide open road, even as you hit the built-up area. And I'm concerned then that there hasn't been any direct mitigation of that, or certainly no comfort's been given to me about how the 106 might address it. So I'd like some comments on that as well, please. I see condition 4. I recognise that that's for samples of external finishes, and also I was really pleased to see that the condition includes it there to remain as such in perpetuity, unless agreed otherwise. But my mind wandered to other PD rights, and with similar recent developments, I'm getting complaints already from Forsyth Foist, which is the one as you go into Premier Inn, past there, and at McDonald's, about people parking all over the place, not using their driveways, and indeed there's been development which would have been covered by the scope of PD, which has neutralised the off-street parking spaces. There's some dwellings on there, the north of the site there. There are 3 spaces in tandem. Now, somebody could quite lawfully construct a single-storey side extension, and people will do it because I've seen it elsewhere, and they'll reduce the on off-site parking to nil, with the result being cars on the carriageway. So it's happening now with recent consent. I'd hate it to happen again. So what I would ask is, if committee are minded to grant consent, is to consider removing the parts of Class A that relate to side extensions on plots where there's tandem parking to the side. Also, there's a comment been made in the report about the introduction of features like the chimneys. Again, Class C PD would enable those householders to remove those chimneys if they wished. If they're considered to be a key part of the scheme, I think we need to remove that as well. Last comment then, the Western cottages, there was a 3D of those as well as the 2D elevations. I was concerned that although they're shown in a variety of colours, I thought the mass was a little, we can just see them on the left there. I thought the mass from the street level is a little bit much, because you've got a continuous roof and eaves line at the front there, and I thought it might be so much better if, where you've got that flying first floor, for want of a better description, if that had been set back as it clearly is from the rear elevation, because you've got that dip in the ridge height. If that was set back, it just helped to break it up a little bit more, and I wonder if that could be done by agreement with a delegated panel. Other than that, Chair, as I say, I have great difficulty in being able to put my hand up for the scheme because of my objection to the principle of the development, but I recognise that the work that's been done by Kate in coming to a better outcome.
Thank you very much indeed for all those observations, and I don't know if Mark or Phil wants to comment on those now or after other discussions. Do you want to do it now? Do you, Mark?
Yeah, thanks,
Right,
Madam
thank
Chair.
you.
If we can just come back on a couple of points, and I'll pass over to Phil for the more detailed ones. I just reiterate what Councillor Howard said in terms of the outline consent has been granted, so I understand his default position in that matter, but it is just the reserved matters that are before you now as a committee, not the principal developments. In terms of design, welcome the comments about the positive changes being made. So yeah, I would like to pass on thanks to the officers involved in that, and also the design panel. So members are involved in helping seek improvements to the scheme at an application stage and pre-app stage, which is really helpful. So if that opportunity arises, I just encourage members to get involved. We can have those discussions in advance of the actual final meeting. So in terms of design, we're happy as officers what's proposed. There's a couple of detailed points raised about PD rights and access points, which I'll ask Phil to cover. Although the one about the black dotted line on the very north of the plan, or the top of the plan as shown, my understanding is that is an existing public right-of-way which runs along the back of the Barrett David Wilson development. So there's no changes proposed to that other than a link into it from this development to improve connectivity.
So that's that last point, yes, Mark's correct. So I'll just get back to the connectivity plan. So yeah, it's actually outside the site, the application site, so the applicant hasn't got control over that, but they are putting in a footpath which will be adopted to the school, so the school can be accessed from this development without leaving it and going onto the road network up here via this route here, which will also help and be available obviously to the wider public as well. In terms of the house designs, we can look at the coach house if members are in agreement with Councillor Howard, to see whether that could be amended, and also the Western Terrace as well, as mentioned at the other point, maybe having a setback for the area where people drive underneath the middle unit. And in terms of permitted development rights, we could put a condition down that the parking areas are retained for parking. I'm not sure we need to actually remove permitted development, just thinking aloud here, because if there's a condition that conflicts with that, it would be in breach of the condition, wouldn't it, in terms of the parking areas? Just thinking aloud here.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think a condition requiring the parking spaces to be retained for parking use would be sufficient and would prevent those extensions that Councillor Howard's mentioned would be problematic.
Well, we could project the chimneys again if members are in agreement with that via a condition. In terms of vehicle speeds along the B road and the use of the B road for traffic to use instead of the heads of the valleys because of the congestion issues with the roundabouts, we can't tackle that here because it's a reserve matters application, so the access has been considered and the principle of development has already been agreed. So we're literally looking at the design and layout of the housing and the internal access roads within this development rather than the wider highway network. And certainly highways could look at that outside the scope of this current application if people do need to be slowed down in this wider area, in terms of traffic calming, etc.
Thank you, Phil. You're happy with those comments there too, Councillor Howard? Yes, I know. I could see you were chancing your arm. Anybody else would like to comment, please? Councillor Powell?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I go with most of what Councillor Howard said. One thing that I am concerned about, the same as he is not just the road round there, but the whole of Gypsy Lane all the way to the road down to here. I sometimes, not very often, have gone that way, coming back from County Hall. And the speed at which the cars drive along the narrow part past the golf cart is absolutely manic sometimes. And I think if we could only have an overall reduction in speed, that might help. But it is this idea that they're going to cut off, do a shortcut and a bit of a rat rang. And I don't know how we can stop them doing it, but I do agree that something wants to be looked at from the speed. And if it was on the whole of that road, it would be pull it down altogether, I think, I hope. I mean, I've had the same trouble in my ward, but I've got 30 miles an hour and they still override it. But it does help, and I think that is something that needs to be looked at. Whether or not these houses were built, it needs to be looked at. And I agree with him over the long piece that looks a bit bland.
On the roof, you mean?
And on the whole piece all in one, if it could be...
Terrace.
Terrace, that's right. If it could be just something to break it up.
That one down in the corner then.
Yeah. But otherwise, I'm quite happy.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. Councillor Dovey now.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think all bar one item is being covered by other speakers. I too didn't like the terrace. Well, I just didn't like it. It doesn't do anything to complement the rest of the development. The one thing that does concern me, though, is this is another estate built in the area, which inevitably will have quite a lot of children, and they will all be wanting to go to school, not all of them local, etc. So are we making the right provision for and commuters as well? Are we making the right provision for bus stops in the areas so it encourages people to use local transport rather than go by car? It's a thing we have to look at for the future to encourage people to get on buses, or it's made easy for them to get to trains. I know that isn't the case here. But and making the road provision on estates.
Thank you, Councillor Dovey. Mark?
Madam Chair, that's a matter that was considered at outline stage. I can't remember the exact details, but it isn't one that we can reopen now. But I'll dig out the details and email members after.
Councillor Brown, then Councillor Becker.
Yes, I just wanted to ask a question about whether or not electric charging points have been considered for this development, or if that is a outline stage thing. I'm not quite sure whether it's at outline or full planning stage that those sort of matters are considered. Thank you.
Councillor Brown. Phil?
Well, yeah, it's something that we've considered for an allocated. Well, firstly, this is an unallocated site, but considered under the old TAN system, so it was a significant material consideration when this was approved. The lack of 5-year land supply, so it wasn't under the ground rules that we've got at present. So. Yeah, it would have had to have been done at outline for us, and presumably put into some sort of 106 if we were going to actually require that. Yeah, I don't think that we can ask for that now. It's that would be ultra vires, I would have thought. Yeah, and it's not something that's required in PPW 10. That's for larger commercial developments, as I understand it. For instance, the car park that we're building, the extended car park here.
Thank you. Councillor Becker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Agree with most of what Councillor Howard has said, apart from one thing, really. Please don't protect the fake chimneys. They're fake chimneys. I hate all things that are fake. We've got on a climate emergency. We're supposed to be doing everything we can, and I kind of agree with the objector in the document who points out that actually the fake chimneys make it harder to put any kind of solar harvesting on your roof. So, you know, I feel like taking that opportunity and making it more difficult, taking that opportunity away from residents, you know, for the sake of a fake chimney. Please don't protect those.
Thank you very much for that observation, Councillor Becker. I don't know whether we can remove that, as Councillor Howard, it's in his ward, requests that it should be retained.
The members, isn't it?
So, sorry?
Members would need to vote on whether they think the chimneys are worthy of protection.
I shouldn't think really they should hinder anything that's constructed on the roof if it's a small engineering works on the end of the roof. But I think that's... I don't know whether we should protect that sort of thing. It's up to the individual taste of wanting one, I expect. Anyway, whether they should be protected...
Yeah, it's worth mentioning you should only remove permitted developments in normally special circumstances.
Yes.
It's whether that is that sort of circumstance, really, do they warrant it in this instance? Right,
thank you. Councillor Brown?
Yeah, maybe I could suggest that it's something that the delegated panel, you said you were going to discuss one element, was it the coach house? Yeah, maybe that's something to discuss at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you.
The terrace and the coach house.
Yes. So could I have a show of hands that that's agreed then, as suggested, that we discuss that as a delegated panel then? Right, that's one leg forward. Any else want to any more observations on the application? Otherwise, I shall ask for it to be moved. Councillor Dovey first, then, please.
Just one thing, the point raised by Councillor Brown about having charging points on estates. I think there should be charging points close to estates in areas, but I think until the technology goes a bit further than it is now, I think putting charging points on estates with people vying for access to them would be disturbing.
Yeah, well, we're not okaying all of that sort of thing on this application.
No,
so,
but
yes, it could come up again at another application. It will be discussed then. Could I have Councillor Howard to move the application, please?
Madam Chair, because of my objection in principle, it was my intention to abstain.
Right.
So I'll let somebody else move it.
Right, thank you. Councillor Powell. Councillor Powell moves for approval. Could you have a seconder, please? Councillor Harris seconds. Could I have a show of hands for approval, please? That's okay. Right, thank you all very much. Next application is now page 47 to 56. This is 00603 at Tinton. Thank you, Kate. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, this application is land between Chapel Cottage and Gower Cottage and Glenview in Tinton. This location plan shows the site which members went to yesterday. So it's a piece of land that was once associated with Chapel Cottage and is now in different land ownership. Fairly flexible for these are the photos of the site. So here you're looking at the access to the site. It's looking down the road at Chapel Cottage there, at the rear of the photo with the chimney and the stone building. And to the left then, behind the gate, is the site itself, and that's the access for it. Here is looking outwards from the site, looking into the valley. And again, looking from the site towards Chapel Cottage. And this is looking at it from the lower road in the valley, looking up. You can see there the sign, the keep out sign. And again, looking at where the Mel gates are, that's where the site is. This is the proposed site layout. So the application is for a 3-bedroom detached cottage dwelling. This plan shows the access point, which was just seen on those photographs, with the driveway to the side and a gravel service for turning area and parking at the rear. This plan also shows the indigenous hedge, which is proposed to be planted along the boundary, and also the levels as well. So there is a level difference between this proposed site, which you would have seen for the photographs, and Chapel Cottage. It's about 1.8 metres level change. Obviously, it varies across the site, but that is on average what it is. If you'd like to go to the next, so this is the proposed dwelling. As you see, it's quite traditional in appearance. So it's natural rubble stone facade with render to the sides and to the rear. Quite a traditional building. Again, we do have a chimney on it, but it is a traditional dwelling in terms of matching up with the neighbouring properties in the AONB. Let's go to the next image. This is a section showing the foundations. There is a consideration of this application in terms of it's within an archaeologically sensitive area, so there has been concerns with regards to the foundations and how they would work. You'll see in the report there is outlined that Glamorgan Gwent Archaeological Trust have been consulted on the application, and we are proposing a condition for a watch and brief as part of this development. First, let's go to the next image. This is just a plan to show the boundary treatments and the distances to the boundaries. So it's approximately 5.8 metres from the road, from Glenview Road. The siting of the dwelling varies in terms of its relationship with Chapel Cottage. So at the least it is 1.94 metres from the boundary, and at the most at the back of the dwelling it's 5.97 metres to the boundary. So if you'd like to go back, Phil, please. Actually, I'll come on to that in a minute. Actually, no, let's do that now. So, sorry, apologies, members. The application, this is there is a historical planning consent on this application. So in 2012, we did give planning consent for the dwelling to be sited on the site. It is in broadly the same location. This one, the previous consent is 4.2 metres back. So this one's set a little bit further back, but you can see there that it is broadly the same location. If you'd like to go on to the elevations as well, Phil, and it's broadly the same type of design. So this one is a little bit higher, it's 0.6 metres higher than the previous scheme, but broadly speaking, it is a very similar type of development that was previously approved in 2014. If you'd like to go on this, and this is a plan to show the street scene of the previous scheme, but it just gives you an indication of where the plan and where this house would be sited in relation to the neighbouring properties. Let's go back to the proposed site plan, please, Phil. Yeah, let's leave on that one. So the application, as I said, as outlined in the report, there is of a traditional cottage nature. It's rumble stone, pan-tiled roof. It is considered to be appropriate in terms of design and its visual appearance in the AOMB. Andrew Blake has commented on the application, has no objections to the design and the proportion and scale of the proposed dwelling. As outlined in the report, there have been a number of responses. Tynton Community Council did raise the concerns with regards to archaeology and acknowledged the fact that there was a previous planning consent on the site. They were concerned that some of the conditions weren't imposed, were all imposed on this planning consent now, and the planning officer has gone through those conditions and applied the correct ones to this consent, which are outlined in your report. In terms of other statutory consultees, there's been no objection from Highways, Public Rights of Way, or the Suds Drainage Department. The application has been considered in terms of affordable housing against the new adopted policy, which was adopted in July 2019, and this application was seeking a contribution of £8,486.14. In terms of local residents, there have been four neighbour objections to the planning application. The reasons are outlined within the report. So there are concerns in terms of the loss of privacy, loss of light, inadequate access, and the increase in traffic in the area. In terms of impact on privacy, this proposed dwelling would not have any windows in any of the side elevations, so that isn't considered to be an unacceptable level of overlooking. In terms of overbearing impact, although it is recognised that the dwelling would be high from residents in Chapel Cottage, it is considered on balance that the proposed development wouldn't be unacceptably overbearing or result in an unacceptable loss of sunlight, particularly given the orientation of the sun from the east to the west. Therefore, we do not feel that the proposed dwelling would have an unacceptable impact on any party's residential amenity to warrant refusing the planning application. So we do feel it is in accordance with policy EP1 of the local development plan. Also, we feel that the proposed scale, design and appearance of the dwelling is appropriate for the AUMB, and as I said, Andrew Blake doesn't have any concerns with the proposed design. So therefore, as outlined within the report, the application is being recommended to members for approval, subject to a section 106 to secure the affordable housing provision and financial contribution, and also for the conditions outlined in the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that detailed description again, Craig, and a lot of the members were there at the site visit yesterday. I believe Councillor Webb, this is your ward, if you'd like to pass comments first.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, members, for coming to the site yesterday, and a particular thanks for David Wong for this full report on this application. As was already said, Craig, thank you very much that the site has a long planning history and a previous application approved a house on this site. I'm really pleased to see the significant number of conditions and also the informative notes after that. They're really specific, and I trust that an eye will be kept on all these to make sure that they're enforced. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. Any other member wish to comment, please? No comments at all from anybody? Councillor Webb moves approval. Do you have a seconder to that proposal? Councillor Dovey seconds the approval. Could I have a show of hands for approval, please?
It's unanimous, Chair.
Right, thank you all very much indeed. That's been approved. The next application is on page 57, and this is in Pulmeric. 00796. I believe that's for you again, Craig. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, this application members should be aware of. It has been to Planning Committee before. So it's land at Bridge House along the A48. This is the location plan showing the site. There is a detailed planning history to this site. Planning Committee have previously approved the erection of 2 dwellings on the site. There was a previous bungalow, a modern bungalow there, and the previous application gained consent for 2 houses. So let's go through the plans. This is a photograph of the site in terms of what has been developed and what's been constructed. This application has not been built in accordance with the approved plans. So, as outlined in the report, what has been built on site is not what planning committee members approved. And we've been in significant communication and dialogue with the applicants about what has been constructed. As officers, we were very concerned with the scale and the mass of the dwellings that have been constructed on site. And we did seek to make alterations to the scheme, which is the application which is in front of you today. Phil, if I'd like to go through to the next. Again, these are more photographs of the buildings, so the garages which have been erected and the houses. Again, similarly, as members would have seen yesterday, these are further photographs. And this is looking at the properties from the lane at the rear. These are the plans the planning committee approved at planning committee previously. So as you can see, they're quite significantly different to what is on site and what members would have seen yesterday and in those previous photographs. Again, this is one of the other dwellings. This is the site plan, which was approved as part of the previous planning application. And this is the street scene that was previously approved. So it is markedly different from what has been approved in terms of the roof and particularly with the garage, which is to the left, is parallel with the road. Now it is at a 90-degree angle with the apex on that side. These are the plans which have been constructed. And these are what planning officers have negotiated to be presented to planning committee as part of this planning application. The case officer with this particular application, I would like to personally appraise in terms of her dialogue and negotiations with the applicant to get the scheme changed. Members are probably aware that the costs involved in changing the roof to be parallel with the road as is now proposed is going to be significant. So the case officers done really well to get these changes as part of this application. If you'd like to go through to the street scene, please, Phil. So this is the street scene, which is now being proposed. So as you can see, the roofs have all been changed to be parallel, and there is now a street hierarchy down the road. So it will match the properties adjacent. The garages aren't proposed to be changed as part of this application. The applicant is seeking to gain consent for as they are constructed. So they aren't constructed in accordance with the approved plans, but they are seeking to approve them as they are. So in terms of the differences between the plans, the report in section 1 does clearly outline the differences. It's worth noting that the dwellings that are before you today are slightly smaller in terms of the footprint and are smaller in terms of the ridge height of the dwellings. In terms of the garages, the garage on plot 1, which is the one to the left of this site, we approved it, well, members approved the application to be 7.5 metres wide. As proposed is 8.3 metres wide, so 800 mils difference. In terms of depth, we approved the application to be 7.5 metres. This is proposing to be 8.6 metres. The ridge height was approved to be 6.1 metres high. As proposed in this application is 4.8, so it is reduced in terms of the height of the garage on plot 1. And the eaves height has also been reduced from 2.9 to 2.4. With garage plot 2, which is the garage to the right, this one, as I said, the roof has changed, so it's 90 degrees change in terms of, it's not parallel with the road anymore, this is an apex, as outlined in the photographs. In terms of this garage, we approved this garage to be 6.6 metres. As proposed, it is 7.5 metres, so the width of it has increased. The depth of the garage was 5.8 approved, and we're proposing here for it to be 6.2 metres. And the ridge height, we actually approved the ridge height for the garage to be 5.3 metres, and as proposed is 4.5 metres, so there is a reduction in the ridge height, although I do appreciate that visually it does look significantly different because of the way that the roof has been changed. And also the position of garage 2, we approved it to be 2.2 metres relative to the dwelling. It ranges, given the change in levels, to 2 and 2.6 metres. But the main difference is the change in the roof, as I've outlined. As I said, planning officers have worked rigorously with the applicant to get the changes on site. We've also reduced some of the openings looking towards Wenville, which is the property to the east. So there were 4 windows within that elevation. We've now reduced that to 2 windows, and they would both be conditioned to be obscure glazed. So privacy issues, there wouldn't be any privacy concerns with regards to that neighbouring property at all. Planning officers have rigorously reviewed and worked with the applicants to get this scheme to an approvable state, and we do now feel that, given the changes, that we are able to support the proposals, as with the conditions outlined in the report. So therefore we are recommending that the proposed scheme is approved subject to the conditions.
Thank you very much indeed, Craig. It's been quite a headache on this site, as you'll all agree, when we visited it yesterday. I believe, Councillor Brown, this is your ward, if you'd like to make your comments first, if you so wish.
Thank you, Chair. As has been said by the officer, basically the 2 houses haven't been built according to the approved plans, and I'd like to thank the planning officer, Helen Hinton, for all of the work that she's done in basically changing it so that changing the roof structure and external elevations to improve the external size of it, so that the appearance is more in line with the rest of the street scene, and also reducing the wall to 1 metre because of concerns about highway safety in this particular issue. Looking on site, that the garage on the left-hand side of that plan isn't in an ideal place, although I'm not sure, even if it was moved further forward, whether it would make a significant difference to the dwelling itself. In terms of the garages, I'm pleased to see there's a condition to do with the need to retain those as garages. But I wanted to ask the question as to whether or not in the original application the parking places were, they are part of the approved plans, the 2 parking places for each dwelling, but I wondered whether or not the previous application, the original one, had the parking places marked out in perpetuity to make sure that they were retained, and in terms of coming out in forward gear in that particular location. The other question I've got really was about the materials. It said the materials to be agreed, and I think there is a mixture of, if I'm right, of stone and render, and I'd like to ask if it's smooth render rather than the rough render, because I think there's a condition at the end on materials, and I think it's 7 samples of the proposed external finishes shall be agreed with the planning authority in writing prior to their installation. So all I can say is that we are where we are at the moment, and I think it's probably been amended to make a better job out of obviously the best thing would have been to have followed the original plans, which were sort of for high quality materials and building and so forth, but there has been obviously improvements put forward in there to what has actually been built. So I'll leave my further comments, and I'd be interested to hear what the committee says. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Howard, did you signal or? Right, thank you, Councillor Howard.
Chair, if there's nobody else more local who wants to come in, I think I'd agree with the majority of the report that the house designs aren't so bad and subject to the amendments to take away the windows to the side that might cause overlooking. The garage for the property on the left, not so bad. The one on the right looks like a real dog's dinner with the eaves that aren't level. It obscures most of the front elevation of the house when I look at the photograph that was taken from the site visit. The effect on the street scene is appalling, even though much of it's obscured by the hoarding. It doesn't read right at all, having those garages there that height, whilst I think the one on the left house is livable with, because at least you can see part of the house and it's set back further from the road. The one on the right, I don't think it is at all appropriate, being smack on the boundary with the highway. And if it were my choice, I'd say house is fine, one garage fine, other one not. So maybe a split decision to disallow the horribly shaped garage on the right.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. Councillor Powell?
Thank you, Chairman. Going to the garages, looking at them in the picture there, as you say, the one on the right, almost at the street, but when you're at the site, the one on the right-hand side was further away from the house. So when you're in the house, you had got a bit of outlook. The one on the left that's in a different angle was so close to the house that you wouldn't be able to look out of the windows of the house at all, at anything. So, you know, it's funny how pictures can make it look closer than it really... The one was far closer to the house than the other one. But I agree. I think if you think about a street scene and how you look at it, really, you could do it those garages with lower roofs.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. I believe, Craig, that the garage in the right replaces an old garage anyway. I think there was one already on the site there.
Yeah, so if you go to the street scene, Phil, of the previously approved, so this is what we previously approved at Planning Committee. Go back. So that is what we previously approved, and that garage was actually higher to the ridge, so it was 6.6 as approved, whereas what's being proposed... Sorry, it was approved at 7.5, and this is 8.3, so it is slightly higher. Apologies, I thought that was going to be lower then, but no, it is... No, sorry, I am right. Sorry, apologies. It's 6.1 metres to the ridge, and as proposed, it's 4.8. So it is reduced from what we approved previously at Planning Committee. That's why, as officers, we're taking a balanced view that I appreciate what Councillor Howard's saying in terms of the ease level of the garage, but on balance, we do feel that given what was approved, what has been constructed on site is acceptable, and we wouldn't want refusal in that case, because it is reduced on what we previously allowed at Planning Committee. In terms of what the comments that Councillor Brown has made, with regards to the render, that's at the moment on the plans it just says render, so that is up for discussion, whether it could be smooth or rough cast. Maybe that's something that we could run past the design panel, or if there's a particular preference that you would like, then maybe that's something that we could look at as part of a condition. The parking was in condition previously on the previous consent. It is in accordance with the approved plans. The parking would have to be provided that, but if you'd like us to tighten up that, then that's something that we could say that would have to be remain in perpetuity. Then I think that would be happy to suggest that. So yes, I appreciate the members' concerns with regards to the garages, but given what we have approved previously and what is on site, we do feel it's not unacceptable, has an acceptable impact on the street scene. So as we've outlined, we do feel we'd like to recommend approval of the scheme.
Thank you, Craig. Do you want to comment again on that, Councillor Brown?
Sorry, my understanding is that it's going to be sort of partially, the garage is going to be effectively stone type of material, because we only saw the inner edges, and the houses at the back are going to be stone, and then they're going to have a render on it, and it would be good if it was a soft render, please, and because there are houses along there that have got a soft render, and it would mix in better, and it would be great if you could add a similar condition to the original application with regard to the parking places as well, because that was actually on the original application as a condition. I think all I can say is we are where we are. I mean, I think the planning officer has done the best that they can with what's available, I'm afraid, but that's the current stage that we're at, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Higginson?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. We were there yesterday, and what's gone on is totally unsatisfactory as far as I'm concerned, and I think I support the officers who managed to get things changed, if you like. That at least there was some success there. I mean, I originally, for my part, it was someone was trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. They have changed a little bit, but as Councillor Powell said, that one garage, I mean, he said, what, 2 metres from the house, and I don't think that's acceptable in modern day standard, building standards, as far as I'm concerned. Yesterday, I think up to a point, I was inclined to think I couldn't vote for it, and I think that's where I am at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Higginson. Councillor Howard? Then Councillor Dovey.
I just wanted to come back on the point of the garage there with the irregular footprint. I don't see, even though it's a double garage, there's no reason for that ridge to be 4.8 metres. That's more like a bungalow. You can have a tile that with a 12 and a half degree pitch, and that will bring that ridge down by at least a metre, and that would be a massive improvement on its own. But like Jim, I've no issue with the houses at all, although I do think that the effect of the house being taller and the side elevation being adjacent to bungalow, the Wenvo to the right there, that extends some way past the rear elevation. That's going to be a pretty horrible outlook, isn't it, from there? But that said, the house is okay, but what about just removing the garages full stop, because it will deal with the issue of the one being very close to the front windows of the one property and the horrible effect of the uneven eaves and the height of the other one. But as it stands, I can't vote for it without some amendment to the garage, because it's appalling.
Thank you, Craig.
Just thought I'd mention, in terms of the height of the dwelling, they are lower than what we approved previously, so it's worth noting that in terms of the implications on neighbouring properties, and we have seek betterment in terms of the amount of windows that are on those elevations. And I think it's worth also stating that we have approved garages on this site, which are higher than what is being submitted as part of this revised scheme. So, yeah, in terms of officer's recommendation, these garages have less of an impact, if anything, in terms of what was previously approved. I don't know if there's anything else I can say on that.
I personally have to visit it yesterday. The garage on the left seems to be completely in the wrong orientation whatsoever if you were driving into that site. It just didn't really add up to me for a big garage. And the garage itself, yes, if they turn the roofs and all that sort of thing, fine with the houses, but the garage itself didn't add up to me. But anyway, that's my observation. Anybody else wishes now to make observation? I think it's Councillor Dovey and then Councillor Becker. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think this is probably the most extraordinary development I've ever seen during my time as a planning officer. I mean, when you drive past something and you've had a hand in it, in its the proposal and approval, and you can see from the road what is being put up is not what you've agreed to. And when you hear that the officers have actually said, this is not what we've agreed to, and yet you carry on doing it, it's almost, well, it's mind-blowingly almost malicious. You can't say anything other than somebody is not taking into account the responsibilities that we have as planning officers. It doesn't value them at all. I just think it's appalling. I am not going to vote for anything with regard to this development, other than if somebody said, pull it down and start again, and I'd vote for that all hands up. But I think it's the worst thing that I have seen in planning in my best part of 15 years in here. It is a disgrace. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Dovey. Councillor Becker?
Yeah, I think that's over-egging it a bit, David. But I haven't been on the count. I haven't been as long. Maybe in 15 years I'll think differently. We have to take the heat out of this. Yes, it does feel almost like we're being slighted again by a developer who once again is trying to sort of game the system a bit. But we've had our officers go in. They've done good work. You know, would we have, like in when we have to look at a retrospective application, would we have granted it at the time? The interesting thing about that, well, no, the interesting thing about that is that we granted something bigger, but with less of a footprint. I remember this when it came through, and our biggest problem was the garage not being, it was too long, and it would force you to reverse out onto the busy road. Now that was what one of the things that was a sticky point about doing those garages in the first place. And actually, as they've made them bigger, that's even more of a problem now. So all the thing about, you know, is it, you know, what we granted them in the first place, I think is pretty sort of irrelevant in terms of we've done good work in getting something that on the houses, we definitely would have approved. But those garages, where they're longer, that actually increases the problem and the chance of collision out onto the road for me. So, you know, I find myself in agreement, just, you know, for different reasons.
Thank you, Councillor Higginson and then Councillor Brown.
Yeah, just in conclusion from my part anyway, Madam Chairman, I mean, I look at the application details and the final comments were during the course of construction, it has become apparent that the development has not been carried out in accordance with the approved plans with variation to the design position and size of the dwellings on site. That figures greatly in the decision I'm going to make on this when it comes to voting.
Thank you. Hold on a moment, please, Councillor Brown. And Mark wishes to comment.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. You probably know what I'm going to say. I understand members' frustration at times that things are done without consent and we have to pick up the pieces and look at retrospective applications or amendments, but that is unfortunately part of the process for us. We cannot refuse this application just because it isn't as per the original plans. We can only refuse it if we think there's material harm caused by what's now proposed. So he's not applying to retain exactly what's built on the ground, and you've seen we've negotiated amendments to mitigate harm. You've seen the officer recommendation, but you would have to identify harm caused by what's proposed now, rather than just the fact it isn't what we asked for in the first place.
Thank you for that explanation there, Mark. Councillor Brown?
Yeah, could I suggest, I mean, I think now that the officer has made changes to the roofs and the elevation and, you know, improved the exterior of it, could we actually just defer this application to have a look again at the garages? Because one of my concerns is basically that is a very busy highway, and I'd really, if there was any, you know, changes, I'd want highways to check that they are happy with those changes, because they need to get out of there in forward gear. And obviously there's the condition on the garages about using them as garages, and on the parking places to try and make sure that that's clear. And if you move that garage forward, I'm not sure what highways implications that would have. So could we consider possibly deferring this just to have a look at the garages itself? Would that be acceptable? Because I didn't realise till I went on site, and it wasn't so much what Councillor Howard has mentioned about the, you know, looking at it from my level is on the garage on the right-hand side. It was the one on the left-hand side. I hadn't realised, because obviously with the banners there, you couldn't see on site. I hadn't realised how close that garage was to the actual house, but I don't know if it was moved further forward, what difference that would make. And my main concern in that area is the highways implication, because it's a very dangerous road, and the previous house that was there before, it was close to the road, and it was people stopped living there because it was hit on a number of occasions, and people stopped living there because of that. So I think the highways issues is one of my you know, major concerns. So could I suggest that as a way forward to see? I mean, it may be that there's nothing that can be done about the garages and the parking places, but it's such an important point in terms of highway safety that I wouldn't want to suggest something that didn't match and cover that particular issue. You know, because I don't, obviously whoever occupies those houses at a later stage, I don't want to see, you know, that them put in any danger as a result.
Thank you,
Thank
Councillor
you.
Brown. Did Councillor Howard, then Councillor Dovey, then back to Craig. Thank you.
Well, I hear what Mark says, and I don't think if that had been presented initially as an application, then I wouldn't have been able to support it with the garages in those positions. So I'm not at all concerned about the fact it's retrospective. I don't give any weight to that at all. But I do think in its current form that the relationship of the garages to the houses and the street scene is detrimental in terms of appearance and character, and also clearly would be to the amenity of any future occupiers with them being so close and so tall. So what I was going to suggest is maybe one way out, if we didn't defer it, would be a split decision for the houses, approval for the houses subject to a condition for layout of parking for each plot. Obviously that's up to officers to word, but then to refuse the garages, and I believe that could be done. And the one thing with my other hat on, I'm just thinking of in terms of an application that I refuse for something very similar that the consent had expired. That went to appeal. The appeal was dismissed because the inspector looked at what was in front of them, and the planning history of the site they didn't give that much weight to.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. Councillor Dovey, I believe, was it, and then back to Craig.
Just one thing I forgot to do, and that is thank the officers for the work that they have done in trying to make this proposal vaguely acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dovey. Yes, there has been a tremendous amount of work, because once something's built, to try and rectify that and put it right is going to be a costly thing for the applicant. Craig, do you wish to comment again then, please?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you very much. I want to pick up on some of Councillor Brown's concerns with regards to the highways. The access arrangement is the same as what was approved. In actual fact, it's been a bit of a betterment, and I think this is what's concerning some of the issues with regards to the visual appearance of the garages as well. The local community asked for the wall on the boundary of the site to be reduced from 2 metres, which is what Planning Committee approved, to 1 metre. So as you can see here, the wall has actually been reduced, which makes the garages obviously more visually prominent, because the local community requested that we reduced it, which the case officer Helen Hinton did do. So the boundary wall has been reduced from 2 metres to 1 metres. The visibility on the visibility display on the previous scheme was 30 metres in each direction. As a result of that reduction in the height of the wall, and also because of it's been set back slightly, the visibility is now 40 metres. So in terms of highway implications, it's either the same or better than the previous scheme. Also in terms of parking and turning, they are the same in the previous scheme as well. So parking provision, both properties would have free spaces, and there is adequate space to turn the vehicles. The garages are in roughly the same location as what was previously approved. So I just wanted to pick up on that in terms of some of the points, in terms of the visual impact of the garages. That wall, I think, is having an impact on the visual appearance of them. And I appreciate what members are saying in terms of the visual impact of those garages. And if you do feel that it's unacceptable, then it's something that we can look at in terms of Councillor Howard's suggestion of a split decision. But I can assure you that the case officer has significant communication with the applicant to make amendments to this scheme, and obviously want this application determined on its merits.
Thank you. Councillor Brown, then Councillor Webb.
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, in my view, I'd rather have the garages and the 1 metre wall, because the reason for the 1 metre wall is basically because, and when we were on site, the wall is actually higher than that at the moment. And the reason for that is for you know, so that you can see well when you're coming out, because it's a shared access out. And so I wouldn't like to see that wall high, because that was one of the things that the Community Council were adamant about, because of their main concern about highway safety, that, you know, you can't have a wall too high because, you know, basically because of visibility issues. So I think, you know, that must be retained at all costs, I think. And in relation to a garage, I suppose, in a sense, the fact that it's conditioned that those are going to be parking spaces and the ones outside is an added advantage. But I mean, I don't like the closeness of the garage. It's the left-hand one that's more of the problem when we were on site, because we didn't realise how close that was to the actual house, and you couldn't see because of that banner that's been in front of the properties for some time. But you know, I really wouldn't want to see that wall changing, because that's what the you know, the community council were adamant about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Webb?
This is a bit funny. How can we put our names to something like this, the planning committee, as we look at it there? I'm sorry, this application has only been in for 6 weeks, and it's here before us now. I mean, surely there's time to renegotiate, or, you know, and that level of that garage window, the garage roof, comes up as high as the eaves. Thank you.
Chair, can I, to make progress, can I move a split decision for the retention of the houses but not the garages? My understanding is then, because there's an element of refusal, it'll have to come back to the next committee, which will also give officers and the applicant to consider anything else to improve the issues with the garages. But I'd move that if anyone seconds it.
I would second that.
I think that's a very good suggestion, Councillor Howard. Craig, do you wish to comment on that proposal by Councillor Howard?
If that's what members determine, then yeah.
Right, so we have a split decision as proposed by Councillor Howard, that we approve the change that is put forward for the houses, but to take that separately then, could I have that as a show of hands on a second of the approval of that we have approval just for the change of the houses? Could I have a show of hands, please?
I think that's unanimous, Chair.
Right.
Harris voting in favour.
Are you voting?
No.
No.
That's
No. And then could I have, as suggested, on a split decision, that we reconsider the orientation or whatever, or the height or layout of the garages? Craig, you wish to comment, please?
Can I just ask for a point of clarification in terms of, would we, rather than go back to the original consent, in terms of the orientation of the garages and what had been approved, which would be a higher ridge and the change in the roof, or would you want to see something completely different? Because you've already got planning consent for the garages as we previously approved them, so I just want to get that point over, really.
Personally, I think, yes, we will have 2 garages there, but the actual orientation and height and size of them should perhaps be changed a little.
To what was approved originally? To what was approved?
Yeah.
Yep.
That's above the eaves, something like that.
But Chair, what was approved originally isn't being proposed now, and I'm not sure it could be built in its original size and location. That's the issue. So we need to offer the applicant an opportunity to come back with a revision, or just not to have garages full stop, because there's plenty of space within the curtilage for parking that's not covered.
But I think it should go back to the applicant, if that's okay with Craig and Ms Hinton, to sort of negotiate with the applicant of what a new suggestion would be for the garages on the same, more or less the same footprint, but differently to what has been already built. Is that all right?
Madam Chair, can I just stress we aren't starting from a blank canvas. There is a planning consent that's been through planning committee, so this is a fallback, if you like. It's slightly odd circumstances in terms of where it's been implemented, but I did pick up, I may have misunderstood, but I think one member was saying that hadn't appreciated how close the garage was to the house and doesn't like it now. That's not a decision that we can defend at appeal, in my opinion. Having approved something just because we decided it may not have been a good decision back then, we're stuck with that.
Personally, it was the orientation, the opening into the garage. Is that same as it was before on that left? No, it was on the side, wasn't it? And that, to me, would have been a safer issue for you to drive into the garage and reverse out and go out in a forward gear. But as it is, it's a manoeuvrability between the opening of the garage and the wall. Once you got in there, it just seemed to be a difficult manoeuvre, and perhaps the height of it should have been better, and it wouldn't perhaps need to be so close to the house.
Yeah, I think, Madam Chair, if you think the garages have increased in size and reduced the manoeuvrability in the forecourt area, then that's certainly something we could look at.
it's not working properly. Obviously, the applicant isn't happy with the plans that were originally approved and has just decided to carry on regardless. And you know, I think we've got a point as well, to be honest with you, as members.
Yes. Thank you, Councillor Webb, for that observation. Councillor Powell?
We have approved the new type of plans for the house. How far out were those houses from the original plans? Are they on the proper footprint?
So,
Or
as
were they-
outlined in the...
Yeah, because what I'm wondering about is we've got this sort of crammed up business with the garage at the front, but there's quite a bit of room behind. Are they on the proper footprint that they were from the original? It's the footprint was all right. It's just that they've gone...
It's the orientation of the roofs.
It's the
that is
orientation of the roof, yeah. that's
So,
right.
so as I said in the presentation, they're actually smaller in terms of their footprint.
Yeah,
So they're in the right location,
Yeah,
slightly
it's
smaller.
the right location, that's all I wanted.
And they're smaller to the height, reduced height as well in terms of the roof.
So we've agreed now and voted on the change to the houses. Everybody's agreed on that now. May I be clear on that? And whether we go back and ask the applicant, if that's the most obvious way to go about it, before they complete any more, that we look at the orientation of the garages, although we have approved 2 garages there, but I think we can amend that to make it more acceptable. Councillor Becker?
Orientation and footprint, I think, as Mark was
Yes,
suggesting.
yeah.
Both of those, I think.
Yeah, could I have a vote on that suggestion, please? Everybody okay with that? That we go back to the applicant and look, and Craig and Miss Hinton have a look at the orientation of, and the size of the garages where they have, because they will have garages, but we need to see exactly in detail how they are set on that site. Could I have a show of hands for that, please?
Could I just add another stipulation that obviously my main concern is the highways issue and, you know, making sure that all the parking places are marked out. And at the moment we've got sort of like 4 per house and, you know, I wouldn't want that to be detracted in any shape or form, you know. Okay, thank you.
Right. I think all of that will be in a package with the garages, I think. Is that all okay? Could I have a show of hands on, please?
Madam Chair, before you go to that, the thing I'm concerned with is what's gone on without planning approval. I'm concerned that even though we might make a decision here today, that it might not necessarily be carried out by that. That's the problem I have.
Thank you very much for that, Jim. I think it will be closely monitored step by step, I should imagine, when this is... If that is what you agree to do now with the garages.
I echo Councillor Higginson's remarks as well.
Could I have a show of hands for what has been suggested on the garage sites?
It's 4, I believe, Chair.
Those against? Those abstaining?
5 abstaining.
Couldn't I just suggest the original thing rather than make it too complicated, just to defer the question of the garages to allow officers scope to discuss it with the applicant rather than putting too much detail on that at this stage? Would that be acceptable?
That's what I suggested, Councillor Brown, that we have discussions with
Yeah,
Craig and
I
Miss
thought,
Hinton.
but I thought it was about orientation and things rather than specify that.
No, they will go back to the applicant to see what they will put forward. And then I
Yeah.
think that will come back to us then simply on the garages.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So
Because I didn't really understand what you were putting forward.
So
there. Thank
I
you.
want to vote now on what I'd suggested of getting the applicant to have dialogue now with the officers about the garages. Could I have a show of hands, please? 1, 2. Right. So I think that is the best way forward to resolve this application. Thank you. Thank you, Craig.
Just in terms of clarity and process as well, if the applicant isn't willing to make any changes, do you want us to come back with a reason for refusal for the garages in the next meeting? And what would those grounds be, just so we can try and get the word in for that? Visual impact and...
Yes. But
Okay, thank you, that's
hopefully
all I
you
wanted.
can make fairly quick.
Well, yes, hopefully the applicant will be
that
amenable to
we
that.
can put this to bed, because we don't want to look at the eyesore for too long. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank
we'll
you.
now go and move on now to the application. Sorry, Councillor Ware.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much, and I hope you're all clear about what's going to come back now on that application at the next meeting in October. We now go to Lansdowne Road, Abergavenny, 01032. Thank you.
Thank you.
Phil, thank you.
Yes, again, a site we looked at yesterday. There's 2 building plots that have been granted permission, which are now underway on site, as we saw yesterday. The plot that's further away from Lansdowne Road, towards the back of the site, now seeks consent to erect a single garage to serve the plot in front of it. So I'll just run quickly through the photos. So that's looking at the site from Lansdowne Road, and the plot is down the far end, behind the trees, really. That's where it's going, in the corner of the plot. That shows the actual house. It's now much more progressed than that, and the garage would be roughly where we are, the photo's being taken. That's looking back where it would be, in the corner there. That shows the site in context, and then that shows the garage in that corner there. It's a single garage. Dimensions 4.2 metres wide, 6.6 metres deep, and 4.15 to ridge, 2.4 metres to eaves. There's been some objection locally in terms of it being an overdevelopment of the plot, but we've assessed it and we think it fits in well with the overall scale of and layout of the 2 plots, and it won't harm the appearance of the existing dwelling, and you can still carry out the landscaping that's been approved as part of the original development. And in fact, more trees have actually been retained within the site than had originally been proposed to be removed. There were concerns that because we'd removed permitted development rights to extend or build out buildings for the 2 plots, that means then that in effect the permission is and development is sort of frozen in time. You can't do anything else. All it means is we've got control of the future development in the interests of amenity, so that certain permitted developments, which could end up with quite significant outbuildings, for instance, being developed, aren't built without our scrutiny and control. So it doesn't mean to say they can't build things, but it comes under our form of control and permitting regime, if you like. So I think as officers we feel if that had come in the first instance, we would have recommended approval for that scale of development. It's a single garage, it's not a large development, and it sits comfortably within this plot. So we would recommend approval for the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. This isn't the one with Mr. Grocott, is it? Councillor Grocott, I believe it's in your ward, if you'd like to take the stand, and you have time to address the committee.
Thank you, Chair. I'm making representations this afternoon not only on behalf of residents of my Lansdowne ward in Abergavenny, but also on behalf of the Abergavenny and District Civic Society and Abergavenny Town Council, who, with the objection of Councillor Harris, who declared an interest and couldn't vote as a member of this committee, but the rest of Abergavenny Town Council were unanimous in opposing this application. I feel it's a bit like the story Groundhog Day, where in the life of an ordinary person, the same events keep reoccurring over and over. This is actually the 3rd application for this same site. The first was rejected because it would have been overdevelopment. The second time, when you considered it at Shire Hall in Monmouth, and I made representations there as well, that was supported because it was a scaled back application, but it was supported on condition that the scale-back application and the removal of future permitted development rights. This application, colleagues, aims to overcome this and clearly defies the wishes of your committee as it came to a decision at Shire Hall. In fact, the dates on the plan for the garage that is the subject of this application are around the same time as you came to that decision about future development on the site. It seems to me that this was an act of some cynicism, knowing that it might be considered to be overdevelopment of a site, and its growth on a site by stealth being the third application for the same single plot. I'd like, if I could, just to quote from the original decision that you made at your meeting at Shire Hall. And you said that there would be no enlargements, improvements, or other alterations to this dwelling house, or any outbuildings shall be erected or constructed. And the reason, if substantial extensions or alterations were necessary, this development would not normally be considered. Now, those are your own words, colleagues. Now, how on earth does that square with an officer's report that says all that is necessary to further develop the site is to submit a new full application and you can approve it? In reality, I suggest that what we have here is a developer who has enough intelligence to hedge his bets, not to put a garage in the initial plans, but to have that plan ready to bring back at a very quick instance in the immediate future time. I think that you should stand by that decision that you made in Monmouth. As you know, I think, I've spent most of my professional life working in education. And over the years, there have been many allegations made that standards have dropped. Well, here is an opportunity for you, colleagues, to show that, in fact, you are educated to a very high standard. Let's have a little go at an English comprehension exercise. If you can spot any difference between no enlargements, improvements, or other alterations to the dwelling house or any outbuildings shall be erected or constructed, with this application for a garage will be approved, is the same thing, then you have failed. But if you think they are actually very different things, I commend you. You have passed your English oral certificate, and you will reject this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Grocott. You will later on have 2 minutes if you wish to sum up. Thank you. Councillor Howard.
Thank you. Well, as I said to my colleague on my right, this garage looks like a Wendy house compared with the ones we've just discussed at the other site, and I would take Councillor Grocott up on his challenge of his comprehension test, and I think the matter for consideration is that of harm to the site and setting, really, and well, I don't see any immediately neighbouring dwellings, or certainly not that could be affected by a dwelling of this scale. But the purpose of the condition was to remove permitted development rights that otherwise might have enabled up to 50% of the curtilage to be covered with outbuildings, not just one, but several of various appearances, materials and scale. That's the reason for the condition. It's not there to say you can never have anything on the site. It's just to make sure that we get control of whatever is put forward. And in this case, I think the design of it is quite pleasant. It's of a domestic scale. The plot is huge by modern comparison, and I don't see the harm. So I'm afraid I'd have to disagree with Councillor Grocott and move approval.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. And it is applaudable that there are to be retention of a lot more of the trees, as it is quite what you'd call a leafy suburb, really. So anybody else wishing to comment, please? Councillor Webb. Councillor Webb, I believe Councillor Powell has already beaten you to that, to second the proposal. Yes, yes, you obviously, that's quite all right. Anybody else wish to comment? No, does it need any explanation from an officer as to what permitted development rights?
I think
being
Councillor
withdrawn?
Howard summed that up very
Yes,
succinctly.
I think so.
and
He is a
eloquently.
trained officer himself. So could I have a show of hands for approval, please? Unless Councillor Grocott wishes to sum up for 2 minutes. No. Could I have a show of hands for approval, please? And one abstention, is it, Councillor Brown? Thank you very much indeed. So that has been approved. Thank you. We now go to page 75 to 80, and this is application 01069, Cross Ash, Abergavenny.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So this is a household application in the village of Cross Ash. The application is presented to members today as the applicant is employed by Monmouthshire County Council. So it's for an extension to an existing domestic garage. So that's the garage as it currently stands. There is a carport to the side. You can probably see in the next photograph. That's within the carport. That carport would be demolished. That's the site location plan there on the edge of the village. That is the garage as it stands. So fairly small scale standard domestic garage. That's its position to the west of the property, and you can see that the floor area for the rear extension to the garage. I think Phil, the elevations are on the next slide. So it's to extend the garage to the rear. So it would be extended by a depth of 7 metres, would continue along the same ridge height, so that would be 5.6 metres at its, 4.3 metres at its ridge, 2.5 to the eaves. External materials would be to match those of the existing dwelling, so render, white UPVC windows, black UPVC rainwater goods, and timber fascia and barge boards, and concrete roof tiles. In terms of its impact then, it's considered to be, would require some excavation of the raised rear garden, but there's no neighbouring properties to the rear. Indeed, in terms of neighbour amenity impact, the closest, I believe, is approximately 19 metres away. The garage would be used for personal domestic use, as some of the members were on site yesterday would have found out. It's a workshop for the applicant's quilting hobby. So in terms of its visual impact, it's considered to be still an appropriate domestic proportion and scale. Owing to those distances, it wouldn't adversely affect the amenity interests of any third parties. And therefore, for all those reasons and the conditions set out in the case officer's report, it's presented to you with a recommendation to approve.
Right, several of you visited there yesterday because I have comments from you. Councillor Powell.
Yes, I'd just like to propose it to be approved, because she made it very clear to us all what it was for, and having been a bit of a quilter myself, my daughter does quilting, you do need, if you're going to do it in a more extensive way, you do need room for the machines and the material, and I think it's a genuine application. It's not going to be used for anything other than that, so I would approve it.
Councillor Higginson.
Yeah, I'd like to second that, and what Councillor Powell said. There's going to be no impact on anyone or anything around there, and I think it's perfectly reasonable.
Thank you. Councillor Powell, your microphone is still switched
sorry.
on. So it's been proposed and seconded. Could I have a show of hands for approval, please?
That's unanimous.
That's unanimous. Yes, I think that would be definitely would.
Well,
No?
it'd be a breach of planning control if they start using it as a business.
Oh, right.
Yeah, if it was used for business purposes, then yes, as Phil has correctly said, it would be a breach of planning control. It's been granted as household or ancillary. If it was found in any event to be used for whatever reason for other non-domestic uses, then that would be a breach of planning control, and we would follow that course of action appropriately.
Thank you for that explanation, Craig. I believe that completes all applications more or less for this afternoon. Now, item 5, amended affordable housing financial contributions in accordance with the adopted revised affordable housing supplementary planning guidance. I believe this is you, Craig. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, this report outlines to Planning Committee that as of the 31st of July 2019, as you're aware, the Council has adopted a revised affordable housing supplementary planning guidance, and this is outlined in Appendix 2 for you. This has been before Planning Committee before and is now adopted policy for planning officers and the Council at large. As part of the revised SPG, the financial contributions now being sought has been reduced in line with our new approach within the adopted SPG. The revised SPG has been informed by evidence and experience gathered over the last 2 years since the previous SPG was adopted. Under the previous SPG, a number of developments were not considered to be viable, and as planning committee members would have known from dealing with planning applications, a lot of these applications were considered to be unviable, with detailed viabilities appraisals being submitted, which caused a significant amount of time and resource implications for the council. The benefit of this adopted SPG is that we've reduced the financial contribution and we will now hopefully receive a higher amount of payments. We will no longer be seeking to negotiate with developers regarding the viability of schemes via the Free Dragons Viability Toolkit. If the requested financial contribution is challenged by the applicant, the procedure will now be, within the adopted SPG, that the application is reviewed by the district valuer at the cost of the applicant. The report in front of you outlines the formula for calculating the financial contribution for affordable housing, and that is outlined within the adopted SPG as well. Appendix 1 outlines a number of applications which are in the system currently awaiting a Section 106 legal agreement. So these applications haven't been formally determined yet. And as a council, we need to make sure that we determine planning applications in accordance with approved policy. So the now revised adopted SPG, which was adopted in July 2019, is now a key material planning consideration. Therefore, we need to apply the formula to old planning applications. So in that appendix, you will see a list of planning applications. These applications, we're not debating the amount that was being previously sought. We're just changing the financial contribution in line with the new adopted policy. So this money is not money that the council has secured. A lot of these applications will be for self-build developers. In terms of reviewing what's in front of you, we are recommending that we just change the financial contributions in line with the now adopted policy. There are 2 applications within there which one is a slight error, which is application DM 2018-01089 at Newtree Castle Farm. That was for the conversion of 2 agricultural barns and associated outbuildings. In that, it says that we're not seeking a financial contribution. This is actually incorrect, and it's my error, personal error. In the new SPG, between 2 and 4 barn conversions, we are seeking a financial contribution for 1. So 1 is exempt, but anything higher than that, and we would be seeking a financial contribution. So on that one, just need to amend it to say that we'd be seeking £7,744.39. Another application, just to draw your attention to, is DM 2018-01801. This is 12 Elm Avenue in Caldecott. This application has been before planning committee members before and was approved. The applicant previously submitted a detailed viability appraisal outlining that the development is not viable to provide any affordable housing. I did share this with all members prior to this meeting via an email, so you would have seen that viability assessment. Considering this application was being considered before the adoption of the new policy, and we have gone through a detailed viability appraisal, we aren't seeking a financial contribution for that site. But as I outlined in my presentation previously, going forwards with the new adopted SPG, we will not be looking to negotiate on these financial contributions. They'll go to the DV. So members have been asked to approve this change in accordance with adopted policy, which the council have now approved. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you very much, Craig. Anybody wish to comment? Councillor Brown?
Yes, thank you. Just to clarify, this is only where a financial contribution is being made as opposed to building affordable housing on site, which presumably it makes no difference at all to. The other thing I wasn't quite sure of is that it says on some of them financial contribution times a certain amount, then floor space, and then times 58% or something. So I wasn't quite sure. You know, obviously within the others, you know, I mean, I appreciate that those particular ones may not have been built, but you know, it's difficult to actually see what difference it makes in terms of the contribution. And also I wanted to know is floor space, you know, for example, if you do an assessment of a house for insurance purposes, you actually look at each room and you don't look at the floor space on the ground, you look at the whole floor space. And I presume this means the whole floor space as opposed to the ground floor space. You know, the print is, if you understand what I'm saying. So it'd be useful if that was clarified. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Do you wish to comment on that, please, Craig?
Yes, thank you for those comments, Councillor Brown. Yes, so the financial contributions is not relating to on-site provision at all. This is for where we are seeking a financial contribution towards affordable housing. So, and these are ones which are currently in the system with regards to legal agreements. We're not debating the amount with the applicants. They just haven't been processed yet and are going through the process. In terms of where you see there's a formula, these applications are ones where they're outline planning consent only, so we don't know the exact floor space of the dwellings. So the formula would be put into the section 106. So when the reserve matters application is submitted at a later date, we'll be able to work out the exact floor space of the dwellings, and therefore that'll bring out the financial contribution then. So those ones are outline planning applications where we don't know the exact floor space yet. And in terms of calculating the floor space, there is in the SPG it clearly outlines what is floor space and what isn't. So it's an internal floor space of the dwelling. It includes halls, stairways and any attached garages. So there is a clear definition of what we count as floor space in the adopted SPG. Oh yes, all bedrooms, living room.
All the floors, yeah.
Yeah, not just the.
So it's a bit similar to how you work out your metres squared when you're looking at insurance on, you know, there's a website, isn't there, to work out your metres square for insurance purposes. It sounds like it's very similar to that.
Yeah, the SPG it is quite clear in terms of how we work it out, but yes, it includes all those internal areas of the house.
Thank you for that explanation. Anybody else wish to comment? Councillor Brown. Thank you. Could I have a show of hands for your approval of that put forward? Right. Thank you all. Thank you, Craig.
Just to say that the applications which have gone to panel with affordable housing contribution, there'll be a report going back to panel as well to be approved. So in a similar fashion to the report that's been sent to planning committee, any applications which were approved via the panel will be determined by the panel.
Okay. Right. Thank you, Craig. We now go to item 6. This is for mainly for your information on the tree preservation order.
Do you want me to just briefly mention that? That tree is the central one right in the middle of the picture. Our tree officer made an assessment of that and said it was worthy of retention. There was no convincing argument that the householder put up that the tree was threatening to undermine the property itself or the driveway. The inspector didn't agree with that, and there was a lack of evidence to that effect. And fully agreed with the tree officer that that tree was certainly worthy of retention and not being felled in its current position there.
Thank you, Phil. And for your information, the new appeals are all listed at the back as well. So there's no more ado, and I think we all understand what we've dealt with this afternoon. Thank you all very much for your attendance, but I would please add, I know we're not a full complement of the committee today, and we are seeking to have 2 more members to make our numbers up to 16 on the committee, but if, as soon as you realise that you cannot attend a planning meeting, please let me know your apologies as soon as possible, because there will always be a time when somebody gets ill or something or other, but as soon as you are aware that you won't be here, please give your apologies. Thank you very much. Also, as Roger said, we did discuss it earlier on. When the agenda comes out, which is sent by your website, obviously about a week before committee, if you are also aware that you need to declare an interest in any item on the agenda, please make sure that that is well noted as well, because if we leave it until the committee as of today, we could have several that would go out on a declaration of interest and then we wouldn't be quorate. Right, thank you very much, members, for your attendance.